Once called me at 3 a.m. in the morning to come over and...
3 a.m.?
Yeah. Well, I remember I said, he said, can you help? And I said, when? He said, well, right now. Because in Hollywood, no one wants to say no, so I made it. Would you like to hear a cassette tape of my work? And it would say, yes, please send tape. And then I had the other box that said, no, not at this time. Like I said, so I felt like I'd started at the bottom of the bottom. I'd work my way up to the top of the bottom in a way. And then I wanted to start at the bottom of the top. But JoAnn Kane changed my life because it was through her I met John Neufeld and John Williams.
So, Conrad Pope, Part 3, Career in LA. Welcome back, everyone. We are still with Conrad Pope. So, Conrad, could you share with us how you started your career here in LA, in this crazy town?
Yeah, I think like I tell people, it took me 3 years to find the phone book.
Okay.
Because you can spend a lot of time. I was very fortunate to been given a break into the business by Mark Waters, who's this really fantastic composer and fantastic orchestrator, fantastic conductor, fantastic everything, and a great saxophone. And he had a bunch of work, and that's working with Mark. That's where I first met. He once called me at 3 a.m. in the morning to come over and.
3 a.m.
Yeah. Well, I remember I said, he said, can you help? And I said, when? He said, well, right now.
Definitely an orchestrator job.
Yeah. And so I said, yes, I could come over. And it was a sitcom that had the composer, and it had to be big band. And I sat at his kitchen table doing bassy voicings on a bunch of stuff. And then around 7 a.m., this guy showed up, this tall, lanky guy with a lot of long red hair in those days. My hair was never long. I've never had that much hair. But it was Bill Ross, and that's when I first met Bill Ross, and he was going to go and work with Don Davis on Beauty and the Beast.
So it was 1991, or?
Yeah, it's right, 89 maybe. Yeah, I forget, it's early on. I mean, I came here in 87, 88 is when I started trying to find work, and I kept doing this kind of work, and then I got known for doing takedowns, sound-alikes. Some of the first stuff I did was gospel music. One guy I worked for, all he could do is play guitar, and I would get a cassette tape, guitar, transcribe his stuff, orchestrate that for whatever ensemble it was. And I found myself having meetings at 3 a.m. and staying up all night and doing 48 hours. And at the same time, I managed to get, I went to, to the first ASCAP workshop that they had. Okay. But more important to me is that I went to Earl Hagen's BMI workshop. And that was the great revelation and the great boost, and Earl was supportive of me in ways that I was pleased about, and some encouraging, because as David Raxon said, paraphrasing, the song Home, Home on the Range, of the American song with Gene Autry, I guess. He once said, the paraphrase is that, well, where seldom is heard an encouraging word. And that was his bon mot about Hollywood. And the cows are busy all day. And so I started with Mark Waters and with Richard Gibbs was one of the clients, because I'd transcribed the MIDI. Like I said, I'd transcribed MIDI before there was MIDI, because in those days the readout would be just numbers. And so therefore you had to take a cassette tape and basically transcribe this cassette tape in order to make the sketch. And that went on for a number of years, even on to when I was working with Michael Convertino. And then I did something like, it was a vampire film called Sundown that Richard Stone composed, because Stone was a great music editor, and he had this thing, and Mark was the lead orchestrator. In those days, too, I also worked with Cliff Idleman. Okay. That's where I met Mark McKenzie for the first time, all of us. And so I did Sundown. That gave me a kind of demo tape. And in fact, I was amazed that just like a few years ago, they were doing a concert in Germany, and they said, have you got the score to... Because they found out that the one piece they wanted to do was this thing I'd orchestrated out of it. And I said, sadly, no, I don't know where that's gone or where it is. But that gave me a kind of demo tape and an entree. I was trying to get jobs as a composer at the same time. I have 100 stories about auditioning in those days, before synthesizers, really, before you would have to go out, and I would actually hire an orchestra, save up my money, and get a small orchestra in order to demo. Now people do that, but it seems like people have more money, or they earn more than I ever did. And in any case, I had this demo tape, and I would send it out. I always sent cards out, and my cards were always very polite because in Hollywood, no one wants to say no, so I made it. I wish I had it here. Maybe that got thrown away too through the years, but I always remember sending one day. I would say, would you like to hear a cassette tape of my work, demo tape? And it would say, yes, please send tape. And then I had the other box that said, no, not at this time. In order to make it seem very polite, I'm overly polite, I suppose. It's my waspy background. But I had one from Jerry Goldsmith, and I'm sure that his secretary signed with a purple pen. I'm going, no, not at this time. And I put that up because I had everybody's name, Jerry Goldsmith. But I would send out, easily, I sent out over 400 letters for films and trying to get Ian Frazier, wanted to orchestrate with him, sent out a ton of things. And one week I sent something to Sandy Courage.
Ah, yeah, the great Sandy Courage.
The great Sandy Courage and Arthur Morton.
So this is how you met them?
And I did not meet, no, Sandy never responded. Like I would say is that I've got to know Sandy later. Arthur did, because his brother was actually very famous. Lawrence Morton ran the Monday evening concerts here in L.A. and was responsible. Those days, he was kind of like the ambassador from film music to serious music, and was responsible for not only Stravinsky but Boulez being here and a bunch of other things.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
And so, and I think Lawrence was a pianist. Arthur was a cellist. I think their sister was a violinist. In their family, they had a piano trio. But Arthur, he was elderly at that time. He was in his 80s. And he called me up, and I can still see the green dial phone that was plastered to my wall, because every phone call I ever got in those years came over that phone. And it was Arthur, and he said, I got your demo tape, I've read your resume. He said, I think I might be able to help you.
Okay, wow.
And so that's how my relationship with Arthur started, not orchestrating for Jerry Goldsmith, but he got me a job with JoAnn Kane.
So this is the early 90s or?
Late 80s.
Late 80s, okay.
And so he got me, he said, he said, I don't know about how to make it as a composer, but I do know something about the orchestration business. And I wanted steady work, and I was tired of meeting people at 3 a.m. and the phone calling and all this stuff. And like I said, so I felt like I'd started at the bottom of the bottom. I'd work my way up to the top of the bottom in a way. And then I wanted to start at the bottom of the top.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of viewed JoAnn Kane was. And JoAnn, in those days, it was a very small operation. It was all handwritten and all the rest of this. I went in to have lunch with her. Didn't have lunch with her until almost 20 years after, because the first day she put me to work on Michael Small, proofreading orchestrations to Michael Small's movie Mountains of the Moon. That was being, I think, orchestrated by Dedrick, who was a Canadian. And so there I began about 3 years of constant work at JoAnn Kane's
as a proofreader?
Proofreader, takedown person, also doing arrangements of stuff that they needed done, for like source music like I'd been doing earlier. I'd been doing a lot of, like I said, gospel music, jazz music, big band music, all this kind of stuff. It was just constant work, and at the same time I was scoring biker movies and getting little projects like that. And but JoAnn Kane changed my life, because it was through her I met John Neufeld and John Williams, and actually worked on Total Recall. I sometimes think that the reason I got the job was that JoAnn was trying to do a favor for Arthur Morton to get Jerry's business in a way, and they did Total Recall. And I remember that was an exciting time for me, because I could ask Arthur about the orchestrations in Total Recall and whatnot.
So you went to this recording session?
No, that was in London. What I could do is just, I would go with Arthur to some recording sessions. That's when I first met Jerry Goldsmith.
Yes.
And Jerry was really always very nice, because he shook my hand. He said, this is, I suppose, self-aggrandizing in a way, but it certainly wasn't true. But he looked at me and said, you must be special, because Arthur doesn't like too many people. He said, I think the last person he liked was John Williams. Arthur laughed, and Arthur was I thought he was really nice and very helpful to me. And so in any case, that's how that went. And I sort of stayed with JoAnn until 92. And Lars Clutterham at that time had come in, and I was grateful to see him because I got a little film to score, and it was a big film to me. It may be one of the biggest budgets I've ever had as a composer. It was like $100,000 to record 75-piece orchestra, and we did that. And so as soon as that happened, I was no longer reliable for JoAnn Kane, so then I was no longer part of that crew. But at the time, what was great about it was that all the copyists were these ex-players out of the band. You know, remember Ralph Farah, whose brother was Dominic Farah, the very great clarinetist. And Ralph had been with, I forget the big band. He was in the studio musician and played trumpet. And he just got tired of practicing. And that was true with a lot of the people. And so they always knew what a part should look like. And in those days, once you made it into JoAnn's, these older men were very helpful in helping you keep your job, showing you the ropes, showing you how things were done. And there was definitely a way of doing things. And there was definitely a way of how you learned how to streamer and punch and what the good sounds were. And like I said, at JoAnn Kane's, I saw a lot of great music. I saw a lot of crappy music.
Have you seen the recording session of Hook back then? Or
I went to a couple of them, actually.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the first things I ever did for John. That's in Hook. I've been doing some source music.
Source music, okay.
You know, like in JFK, and doing the sort of these jazz sound alike of Sidney Bechet and military music, stuff like, you know, the odd thing that no one wants to listen to in a film. And, you know, and through them I met so many people. But it was primarily Neufeld because it turned out my hand kind of looked like John Neufeld's.
So how did you meet John Neufeld?
I first met him when he was doing the orchestrations for Born on the 4th of July. And I would proofread what he did to what John Williams sketched. And then we'd talk about the choices that he made that might be different than the sketches. And sometimes he had made a mistake, like we all do. But you know, it was very helpful, and he could tell that I was not sitting there trying to not play one-upsmanship. It was more like just trying to really help. And so then he started to trust me, and then I got a reputation for kind of knowing what I was doing and for being able to, I guess, it was clear I knew a lot of music, knew a lot about music because of my rather academic background, I would say. And turned out I knew something about orchestration.
Yes, cool. So let's talk about your careers on Orchestrator for John Williams and all these great composers in the next video. So see you in the next video. Thank you.